a broad question that comes to mind as we explore this topic of those skills that every leader needs to have is, what really is the purpose of a public education? And I've identified several things that I think must be accomplished by schools today. First is, the goal of education is to prepare students to be successful citizens. And we can define that as broadly or as narrowly as we would like, but the reality is that we want them to be successful, and that often means that they are able to find decent employment so that they can start a family and support a family and help their children to achieve the dreams that they have. In order to be successful, though, we must have the skills that are needed now and in the future. And schools are responsible to provide students with those skills that society needs today, as well as skills that society can use in the future. Therefore, in order to do that, the school's curriculum needs to be rigorous and relevant. It needs to meet the needs today, but also be flexible enough that it can adapt to new opportunities and new challenges. And in addition to a rigorous and relevant curriculum, then, instruction must be very active and engaging. 21st century students are not interested in sitting passively by and just letting someone talk to them, lecture at them. They want involvement. And we have the technology to make that possible, we have the software to make it possible, and we need to make sure it actually happens. In order for these previous statements that I have made to become reality, it means some things for the leader of the school. Leadership has to be progressive. In other words, leadership always needs to be focused on the future of where they're going and not necessarily looking back at where they've been. So it means that leadership should be open to new ideas. I mean, there's a certain place for conserving our traditions and our heritage, but also we cannot get stuck in our culture, stuck in our heritage, stuck in our past, or we'll never go on to the future. And really, that's where everybody's going towards. So leaders, we need to be looking to the future and where our school is going and where our students are ultimately going to be in society. And lastly, we need to make sure that the resources are available so that the students can take advantage of this dynamic curriculum and fast-paced and engaging instruction. Resources have to be there, which means that society needs to do what it can do to make sure that students have the things that they need so that they can get a top-notch, high-quality education. So I've identified some skills that I think are necessary for leaders today. And I think these skills translate well to any organization. I'm going to really focus them in on schools because I think that's what most of the participants at this conference are. They're either teachers or they're school building officials. So I'm going to kind of use that as the backdrop for my remarks this morning. But they could apply to really any organization out there. It could be a non-governmental organization, even a governmental organization. These skills are appropriate to them. So let's think about what those skills are. And in essence, what's happened here in the 21st century is that we have redefined what it means to be successful. And what was successful in the previous century is no longer applicable, appropriate for this century. The problem I see is this, that we've changed the definition of success, but we haven't necessarily retooled or redefined what schools are supposed to be doing. I think in addition, we have not updated how we prepare leaders to meet these new skill requirements, and when you hear about the skills, you'll see what I mean. We've not redefined leadership preparation to help provide these skills for our teachers and our students. So I think in addition to changing how leaders are prepared, if we're going to apply these skills to our schools, we're going to have to even change how we prepare teachers. Now, I see 3 important skills that are necessary for success in the 21st century. And I'm talking about success in employment, success in life, and just working with other people here, in my case, the United States, or there in the Philippines where you are. 3 skills come down to this. We need to be more effective communicators, we need to be problem solvers, and we need to be able to network with other people who may not be in the same building, same room, or even in the same country. We're going to look at these 3 skills in some detail, but I think these, in essence, are the skills that if every student left high school with a firm foundation in communication, solving problems, and working with others, we would have highly successful students. Because as you start looking at those benchmarks for success in the 21st century, it's not necessarily what you know, as it is who you know and how you communicate with others, as we shall see. So let's look at communication in some depth here for a moment or two. In the early 20th century, people were defined by what they knew. There was a knowledge base that everybody had to have. Certain facts everybody had to memorize. For instance, in the United States, here's an example. Every school child had to memorize all 50 states. They had to memorize the state motto, the state flower, the state bird, and a host of other things related to each of the United States. It was a part of what was considered a normal education, to have these facts memorized. It was also true of the early 20th century that credentials and experience were the hallmarks of a very successful person. The more credentials you had, the more experience you had, it guaranteed that you were going to get the job you wanted. So knowledge, and not only looking at children, but just knowledge in general. What you knew was more important than who you knew. And as long as you had credentials that identified you, a license or a degree, and an experience in that field, then you were going to be successful. Now, by the late 20th century, and in late 20th century, I'm talking more about, say, from the year maybe 1980 until the end of the century. In that time period, it was not so much what you knew as it was who you knew. Because remember that by about 1980, we had internet access for more people in the United States, and access to information was far easier to obtain than it was in the past. So it was the connections that you made with people. And especially in even the 1990s, the social media explosion, that became critical. If you weren't on a certain social media platform, that you were just nobody, and you weren't surfing the net and interacting and doing business online, those things became very critical. And so really it was more of a people resources focus, a human relationship focus, than it was on basically what you knew or those credentials, those hard documents like degrees and experience. What I think is going to be true, though, of the 21st century is our ability to communicate with one another And our effectiveness at communication is going to define us. Because now we're doing more communication than we ever have in the past. And here I am, communicating with you via a video. I'm not going to be present in the meeting hall with you, but you're still going to get to see me, you're still going to get to hear what I have to say. And this is becoming more and more common. In the classes that I teach at Troy University, most often every term I teach at least one course that is online. I never see the students face-to-face in the classroom. We interact in a platform called Blackboard. There's video conferencing that we do, so I can see them in real time in a video, but I'm not physically in the same room with them. I think then our ability to communicate is going to be very critical to us, especially in our understanding of how do we communicate with people from other cultures. And I'm not thinking necessarily of people communicating and learning another language, although language acquisition is important. I'm thinking about communicating with people who may speak English, but being more sensitive to word choices, slowing the rate of your speech down so they can understand you, speaking more clearly, those kinds of things. Understanding cultural diversity and becoming competent in working with people from different cultures. I think that's going to be critical to this 21st century. And also, I think our communication is going to need to be more globally focused as we are interacting with people from other countries, as I do very frequently now, far more than I would have ever thought to. And I think here's the challenge for our educators today. It's going to be, how do we prepare students for this world? Because when I was in school, there wasn't a discussion about being multicultural or globally focused. I doubt that my teachers thought that I was going to have regular interactions with people from the Philippines or from Southeast Asia, for that matter, teaching, conducting workshops there. I just don't think that was even on their radar screen. I doubt that they thought of me conducting a video class, a video lecture, as I'm doing now, at all. That just wasn't even in the realm of possibility in those days. And look here, just 30 years. Now, I've been out of high school for a little over 30 years. And how much has changed in that time period? It's phenomenal. It boggles my imagination. That's why I think as leaders we need to be very progressive, because we don't know how things are going to change in 30 years. I think what we're doing now that appears to be so cutting edge may be very primitive to the people 30 years from now. And they're going to find it hard to believe how we function with the tools that we had available to us. So communication is going to be a skill that every student needs to be prepared to do and to be prepared with. And I think our curriculums are going to need to change to give students more opportunities to communicate and learn how to communicate with people from other cultures. The second skill that I think leaders need to develop in their own life, as well as this is what they need to work on in schools, is the area of problem solving. It's an invaluable skill today. There are many companies that hire people for their experience or their ability in solving problems. It's not, again, what they know, because access to information can be achieved very easily. And it's just a matter of going to Google or some search engine and typing in what you want to know, and you can find it. Recently, my mother-in-law needed a clock repaired, and she was having some problems with this particular clock, and so she needed to find out how to contact the manufacturer of this particular clock. So I went online, I Googled the name of the clock, and I even found online some people who had said that if you're experiencing this kind of problem with your clock, it means that this part is broken and you need to repair it. And here is a place you can go to get it repaired. I don't think that years ago that would have been possible. You would have had to take it to a local clock repair shop, and they would have had to go find somebody to repair it, and probably would not have been able to repair it. Solving problems is a skill that people will pay good money for because they want people to solve their problems. So, this is a skill that you have to learn. And it's not one that you teach them, per se. In other words, it's not necessarily something that you pick up from a book. It's something that you learn by doing. You do it well, and you'll get better. The problem is solved. You do it poorly, you get no better, and the problem's not solved. So it's one of those skills that you just have to work at and think about. But you can design a curriculum that will help students to solve problems by giving them experience in it. Problem solving oftentimes is a very rational process, a very logical process, and helping students to think logically, think critically, and use the clues that they've been given in order to resolve the problem. So, for instance, back to my clock story, the clock was manufactured by the Seiko Corporation. And I also noticed that this particular clock has movement in the face on the hour and on the half hour. It has a mechanical movement, and it also plays some songs. And it's called Melodies of Movement is the name of the particular clock. So in Googling that, I first went to the Seiko website, their homepage. And by examining their homepage, I found examples of this clock. And I found their customer service number. But I wasn't satisfied with what I had found because it wasn't exactly the clock that my mother-in-law has. So I realized that each of the clocks that Seiko manufactures, especially in this Melodies in Motion type clock, that they have different brands of them. So it meant doing a little research and Googling these various brands. And I found a reference number on the back of the clock and Googled that. And it came up with the exact clock, and I learned a lot about the clock by doing it. Because you see, it's a very rational process to solving problems. And so what we need to be sure to prepare students with is skills to be rational, skills to be logical. And I think that's where leaders can have the greatest impact, by making sure that the curriculum has a balance of information, but stresses more on how do we solve problems. Whether it's a math problem or a problem in history, a problem in society. How do we take the tools that we have and solve their problems? Let's face it, that in today's economy, I guess is probably the best way to say it, in today's economy, we have to understand organizations have problems that need to be solved. They may be distribution problems, they may be sales problems, they may be product-related problems, or program-related problems, but they have problems, and what they want is an employee that doesn't just identify a problem, but they also are able to identify a solution to that problem. And here's where leadership and problem solving come together, I think. Leaders really are tasked with the responsibility to solve problems. It's, again, not just enough to identify them, but what organizations want of their leaders is a person who can create realistic solutions. I always told my teachers that if you identify a problem in your classroom, I expect you to think about a a solution that might solve that problem first and bring both the problem and the solution to me. Don't come to me with I've got this problem and I basically want you to solve it for me. That's what my children do. My young children come to Daddy and say, Daddy, so-and-so's being mean to me. Or, my sister took my toy. Whatever the problem in their life may be. Well, they're children. They don't know how to solve problems. But shame on me if as a father, I don't help them to solve their own problems, so that they don't have to come to me for every little situation. Same thing with our teachers, the people that work with us. We don't want them just coming to us with their problem and expecting us to solve it for them, because then they will always need us to solve their problems. They will never become independent workers. They will always need us to tell them what to do next. And that really is not an efficient way to run an organization. So problem solving is a skill that's going to be very critical to the 21st century. And our schools need to develop a curriculum that is focused on how to solve these problems. The third skill that I think is important for the 21st century, and one that I want to share with you now, has to do with networking. And what I'm talking about networking here is the 21st century needs leaders who can work with diverse populations. People who don't look like them, don't sound like them, don't act like them, have a different cultural background from them. The idea that we're going to live and work where we grew up is rapidly disappearing. Even in the Philippines, it is rapidly disappearing. People are going to Manila, they're going to Cebu, they're going out of the country as overseas foreign workers because they've got to go where they can get a job. There's a few that will be able to stay in their hometown and work there their entire life. But that idea, that notion is rapidly disappearing. We need to be much broader geographically. And I think there's a lot of Filipinos that would love to come to the United States and work because obviously there are greater economic benefits for working here than maybe in the Philippines. So how do we prepare workers that can take advantage of these international opportunities? I think this is interesting that, and I've told this story many times before, so if you've heard it, please bear with me. But I have Comcast as my internet and television provider here in the United States. So whenever there's a technical difficulty after hours and I call for technical support, I usually will get transferred to a call center in the Philippines. It's always in Bacolod, I've noticed. So that must be where the main call center comes in. But I will get transferred to a technician in the Philippines to solve my problem. And I recognize their accent well enough that I can say, oh, you're in the Philippines. Yes, oh, you're in Bacolod. Yeah, I know it well. Yeah, your call center's not too far from the University of St. LaSalle. Been there many, many times. So, and now it shocks them that as an American I would know where their call center is. But it's the idea that companies today are outsourcing a lot of their tasks all over the world. It's cheaper to hire call center workers in the Philippines. They speak English very, very well. They're easy to understand. And of course, I think the pay is better in a call center there than maybe just doing some other work in the Philippines. So it's a win-win. The company saves money. The employee gets a good job with a good company. So it's win-win. But this is the networking that I'm talking about. What makes an effective call center worker is someone who understands what other people are like and how they see the world. So it's important for Filipino workers to better understand the American consumer, especially when it comes to language. I talked to someone who works at a call center whose English is wonderful. Sometimes I think her English is maybe even better than mine. But in talking to her, I said, so how is it that you developed your English so well? And she said what she did was that she would watch American TV shows and she would mimic the dialogue until she sounded more like an American than a Filipino with speaking English with a Filipino accent. And I thought that's an interesting focus on networking, is to speak in a way that Filipinos would, or Americans rather, would understand by adopting their accent. That's a part of networking. It's being sensitive to the needs of that other person. So when I'm in the Philippines, I'm very cautious about how I speak. I try to speak clearly for you, certainly. I try to modify my accent so it's similar to maybe how a Filipino would speak English. And of course I try to bring in Filipino words when I'm speaking, just to put that Filipino at ease. I realize that I talk fast and that I'm not always easy to understand, but I want to put the listener at ease, and therefore when they're at ease, it's going to be easier for them to understand the language. So I think that's a part of networking, I should say. So our goal then in networking should be to prepare students for a very flat earth, a globalized world. We need to prepare workers who are able to work anywhere in the world and not just have to have a job in their hometown or in their home province, but be flexible enough that they can work anywhere and adapt to that new place. So for leaders, because we're talking about leaders here more so than maybe teachers, and we've identified 3 skills of communication, problem-solving, networking. Now I want to turn our attention to the competencies that leaders need to have in order to make those skills a reality in their school life and in the culture as students leave the school. I've identified 5 abilities, I guess are maybe the words that I would use, that leaders need to have in order to create a school environment where students can be successful with those 3 skills. Here are the 5 competencies I think every leader needs to have. And we'll look at them individually, but I'll just give them to you here at one time. Technology, flexibility, advocacy, a global perspective, and then a vision for where they want to take their school. So let's look at these in a little more detail. New technology is here to stay. Here I am presenting at your conference. I'm sitting in my office at my home, and I'm recording this video, which will then be uploaded to the internet, and someone there with the educators group for quality education will download it and show it there at your conference. Technology is changing how we interact with the world. Now think about this. And this is especially true in the United States. It may not necessarily be so true for the Philippines yet. But our world is defined by technology. How we do our banking, how we communicate, how we establish relationships, and how we do education are 4 examples that I would give you. Banking. I do almost all of my banking now online. I pay bills online. I don't go out. I don't send things in the mail to the people I do business with. I take care of those online. The only time that I might need to go to the bank would be when I'm going to deposit some money or I want to get some cash, but even then I can do that at an ATM. But there are some banks now that charge to use a teller at the window instead of doing your banking online. Communication. We do a lot of communication via the internet-based phone calls. When I communicate with my friends there in the Philippines, I use Messenger, and I'll type a message, and we can communicate that way. I've talked to them on the phone using Messenger. So it really, the internet is enhancing how we communicate. There are programs, WebEx is one of them, that allows us to do real-time communication over the internet. I teach using WebEx at the university, where I can see my students, they can see me, I can show them a PowerPoint, and they can watch, and I can talk about that in real time. They can ask questions, I can answer them, and this all be done while I'm sitting at my home and they're sitting at wherever they're at, whether at school or at their own home. Relationships, the third thing that seems to be happening online, is that more and more people, now almost 10% of the people who get married each year, say that they met their spouse online in one of those chat rooms or through an online service. So our relationships happen that way. We maintain relationships. Why, I would not be surprised that half of the room, right there where you're sitting, has a Facebook account, or they have Twitter, or they have Pinterest, or they have Instagram, or they have something else that they use to keep the world updated on what's going on in their life. I mean, I use Facebook that way to let relatives and friends know what's going on in my kids' life and show pictures of them. This year I didn't send out any Christmas cards because most of my family and friends are on Facebook. So I said, why should I pay money to send a Christmas card out when I can just post a greeting on the internet and let people see what's going on? And that's what we did. So it's becoming less and less common to communicate via what we used to call the snail mail. Relationships are being impacted by technology and maintained that way. And of course, fourthly, many people are learning online. They're using the internet as the basis for their school. And I told you that Troy uses internet-based classes and online instruction significantly. We have entire programs that are not offered face-to-face. They are strictly offered in an online venue. So I think technology is changing how we do business in schools. And therefore, here's the news flash. It's not going to be less technology, it's going to be more technology. Technology is getting so small now with this iWatch that came out last year that everybody's going to have the internet with them right there on their wrist. So if we're going to be successful as school leaders, we have to include technology in the instruction of our kids. It is the world that they're going into. That world will be defined by technology, and they will not be a success if they don't have an understanding of technology. And here's where I said we can't excuse, we can't blame. I told you about that earlier. We cannot excuse ourselves by saying we do not have technology, or we don't have the money for technology. All we're doing then is handicapping our students, and they will not be effective because they will not have those experiences. Now, there are plenty of internet cafes, and I've seen the kids sitting there hour after hour. Matter of fact, I was on a tour for Dep Ed one time, and we were having lunch, and there just happened to be an internet cafe across the street. And that internet cafe was crowded with kids. You could see them all in their uniforms. And about 1:30, when school was supposed to start, the kids started drifting away from the internet cafe and heading back to class. Now, how sad it is that the class that they're going back to does not have the internet and is not using the internet in the classroom and in instruction. You see, that's what the kids don't understand, is the place where internet should be It's not. It's outside. It's at a separate place. I understand the finances of the situation, but I also realize that in their world, this is how they're going to interact with one another. It's going to be through technology. It's not going to be less. There's going to be more of it. We can complain about it all we want as adults, because most of us are pre-digital technology. We're the people before computers and before the technology has taken over so much. So for us, it's like, oh, what's the problem? But the reality is, if we're going to prepare these kids for their future, not our past, then we're going to have to adopt it. And as school leaders, we need to be the first adopters. Remember, leaders are the people out front. They're not the people following the trends. They're the people making the trends. And so we should be those first adopters and make sure that our schools are fully equipped with the technology that they need so our kids can be ready to meet the challenges of this new century. The second competency that I think leaders need to have is the competency of advocacy. Now, understand that an advocate is someone who speaks for another. They're a representative. They're a passionate voice for someone who may be weak, who isn't able to speak effectively for themselves. So I think that adequately describes who the school leader is. We need to have leaders who are advocates for, or to really put it specifically, that they are representatives of their teachers and their students, that they stand up for their needs. To really put their own personal interest aside and advocate for the needs of others. In other words, subordinate their needs for the needs of the group. And this is why I think advocacy is important. Because if we're going to redefine schools and prepare kids who can communicate, solve problems, and network, we're going to need to have the resources that are going to make those skills a reality. Well, if that's going to be the case, we're going to have people who can advocate with the DepEd and business leaders and community leaders and governmental leaders, provincial leaders, all of the people, all of the stakeholders, including parents, to say this is what we need for 21st century schools. And have the courage to stand up. You see, that's what makes advocacy work, is not only being willing to stand up and having a position that allows you to stand up, but also the courage that you need to stand up and say, this needs to change, and I'm going to be a voice to make sure it changes. It requires a lot of courage. Someone who is willing to take risks. That really defines what it means to be a leader. A manager just maintains the status quo, but the leader is the one who takes the risk and says, we need to do something differently because this is going to help our kids to be successful citizens. Third competency, in addition to advocacy, is flexibility. And I know you're thinking that's probably a strange competency, but what I have found is that effective leaders who really are successful, also are ones who are very flexible. They're willing to adapt to new realities and change things, not just for change's sake, but change to take advantage of new opportunities. Now, Thomas Jefferson once said that the only constant in the universe is change. Change is coming whether we like it or not. And even in the Philippines, where many things have remained the same for a long time, and we do things because it's the way we've always done things, change is coming there too. And some of it will be because new technologies are changing. I can remember talking to a school teacher, and she told me that the children in the Philippines are changing. And they're becoming more disruptive in class and unruly. And they've had to really discipline them. And I said, ma'am, I think the children in the Filipino schools are wonderful. I mean, I don't see that. What's the problem? She said, well, we're having to tell them to be quiet more often so that they can listen and learn. And I said, well, what do you attribute the cause to all of this change in how they're behaving? And she said the internet. Technology is showing them how other kids behave. And maybe the other kids aren't behaving well, and so they're following that as a role model. I don't know. But she attributed it to the internet and the use of technology. Change is happening. Technology may be driving some of it, but the foundational point is we had better be ready for the change that's coming. And I think that's what separates leaders from managers, and maybe even great leaders from just mediocre leaders, is that the great leader is always prepared for change. And they're the ones preparing others to change. You see, your job as a leader is not only to be aware that change is coming, but your job is also preparing your staff to take advantage of the change, to be adaptable to the change. Great leaders are also quick to adjust to change. They really avoid the futility of resisting change. And I can remember this when it came at the university where I teach. When I first started, very few people taught online. They did something what they called live to tape. In other words, their classes were videotaped, and then the videotape was sent out to the student. And the student watched your lecture and then completed assignments and took tests, and all this was done that way. About, I would say maybe 5 years ago, the chancellor told all of the administrators that he wanted to see Troy become more and more engaged in online instruction. And I could see that this is the way higher education was going in the United States. There are many online virtual programs out there today, for-profit and some non-profit. And so I decided for myself that I would take the steps to become more competent in online teaching. The university offered training in their platform, and it was free, and so I took the training, and lo and behold, I was one of those, as I said, a quick adopter. I adjusted to the change quickly. And when it became mandatory, it was no real problem. But I know colleagues of mine who resisted. I'm not teaching online. I don't think we should teach online. We should teach face-to-face because that's the way we've always taught. That's the best way to teach. And now they are being forced to change. And it is really stressful for them. For me, it's no big deal. It's like, oh yeah, I teach online all the time. And I think students learn as much online as they do face-to-face. And in some cases, I think they learn more. So the idea then of flexibility means that we don't resist the inevitable. We're all teaching online at Troy. Maybe not all of our classes, but we're teaching at least one class online. It was futile to resist it, because if you wanted to teach and you wanted a job, you changed, and you became an online instructor. In addition to adjusting to change and adapting and being quick to adapt to change, I think great leaders are also those people who don't fear change. They see change for what it is. Change happens. It's life. And so we aren't afraid, right? It's just a new opportunity, and we take advantage of it. And we don't allow it to scare us, because if we're going to be scared by change, then we're going to be frightened all of our lives. We're always going to be running, because change happens whether we want it to or not, and that's just part of life. And I actually think that people who say that they don't want things to change are the same people who say they're bored by their lives too. So I think we really do crave change. It's just that it scares others does. And I think that's what separates the great leader from him, is someone who isn't frightened by the change. Lastly, I don't think that leaders are stressed by change. In other words, that it bothers them to have to change. I think that if you're going to be a flexible leader, you're not going to be stressed by it, because you're going to do what you have to do to take advantage of the change and adjust to it. I heard an old proverb one time that talked really about flexibility. It has to do with the weeping willow tree, a very common tree in the United States. It grows along rivers and by lakes. It really likes a lot of water. But the thing I noticed about the willow tree is it really bends. It doesn't easily break. It bends. So the proverb said, "Be like the willow tree. When the storm blows, bend with the wind, and you will stand strong." And that's why willow trees very rarely get torn up by heavy storms. They lose a lot of leaves, but they don't get torn up by the storm because they bend with the wind. They just go in the same direction the wind is blowing. And I think that's true for leaders, that we need to be those people who are flexible enough to not let life's storms sink our boat and capsize us, that we flow with it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm saying that we should be a person of no standard and that we just go from place to place. No. I'm saying there's consistency. There's a root there that holds us to our foundation, our core values. But we allow the storms of life not to tear us and destroy those core values and that foundation. We stay solid on our foundation, but we blow with the wind as it goes. Flexibility is that third capability that every leader needs to have. The fourth competency that every leader should have in order to infuse those important skills into our schools is that they need to have a global perspective. They need to increase the boundaries of their world. I am still amazed at the number of people in the United States who have not traveled internationally. Do you know that only about 2% of the American population has a valid passport? And less than that has traveled internationally. Shocking to me, because of the resources that they have. One would think that they would do a lot of traveling, but they don't. And I think a lot of it is because they have not increased the boundaries of their world. They see their world limited by the state or town where they live and the United States where they live. For the Filipino, I think that many of them would travel internationally. Of course, resources being what they are, finances prevent them from traveling from one, or a passport maybe prevents them from traveling from one place to another. But I have seen many Filipinos who do think beyond where they are, and they're doing overseas workers type visas. I met one in Singapore last year, and in talking with her, I learned that she was from the Philippines. I think she was from Cebu, if I remember correctly. And she was working in a gift shop at the airport. And I told her how that I was traveling back to the Philippines for some work. And she said, "Oh, really, I'm from the Philippines too." And I said, "Well, what brought you here to Singapore?" And she said, basically, it was a job. I was able to get a job here at this gift shop because my English was so good, and they wanted people who could speak English. And she was able to see her life beyond the Philippines. And in that time, her family has moved to Singapore, and they've really reestablished themselves there as their new place of residence, because they thought broader. They realized that overseas work was not an impossibility. It wasn't an impossible dream. Now, thinking globally and having that perspective also deals with this issue of, it's an understanding that what happens in one country impacts what happens in other countries. We can look at the state of current affairs today and terrorism, although not positive topic, but it is the reality that terrorism affects all of us, not just the United States or not just in the Middle East. Economies are interrelated, so economic downturns in one country can impact the economies of other countries. Essentially, I guess what I'm saying is that this global perspective has an idea that the world is flat and that there's a greater deal of mobility throughout the world. And I think that's only going to increase. People are going to move from country to country, and it is not going to be unusual to see people educated in one country but living in another. And I think there is where we start instilling those values of networking in giving children a perspective. The world is much bigger than the province where they live, no matter how small or how remote the province may be. The idea that we need to take on as leaders is see the world as it's not impossible for us to be a citizen of the world. I used to have a personal introduction card that I would give people, and it had my name on it, and it had my email address, and at the bottom I put the places where I spent the most time. So it would have Dothan, Alabama, Tarlac City, Philippines, and then Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, because I spent most of my time in those three places throughout the year. And it wasn't so much as showing off to other people as it was for me to remind me that I am more than just an American citizen. I consider myself a citizen of the world as I travel extensively in Southeast Asia and have friends in all of those places, and really consider myself one of the Filipinos, even though I'm not Filipino by nationality or by citizenship. I have dear friends there, and that's like a second home to me. So this perspective is a perspective that we need to instill in our students, and it will flow from us. The final competency that I'd like to present to you today deals with vision. And your role as a leader in developing a vision for your school or for your organization. Understand that leaders are the eyes and ears of the organization. If they are blind, so is the organization. And I'm talking about blind from the standpoint of having a vision for where the organization needs to go. Remember that vision answers the question of where we're going as an organization. People need to have this information in order to function, to do their job well. And so, if leaders are blind, then really the organization is blind, and it's groping for where it needs to go. Ultimately, if there's no vision, we're told in the Bible that the people will perish, the organization will die. And so it is your job as a leader to develop the vision of the school or of your organization, as the case may be. Remember that vision is a mental image of the future. It is a picture of what this organization is going to be like a year from now, 5 years from now, or even 10 years from now. And I think in terms of the skills of communication, networking, problem solving, it takes a visionary leader to say, how are we going to adapt those skills into our current program? I realize that the Department of Education has a very prescriptive curriculum, but how can you bring those skills in to the curriculum as it is right now? Because even though you're fulfilling the curricular responsibilities that DepEd has set for you, you can bring in these skills of communication, networking, and problem solving into the curriculum and infuse them. A visionary leader is looking for, how are we going to bring this in to prepare our leaders to be successful? It is ultimately the life of your organization that's at stake for developing that vision. Now, we could spend hours talking about how to develop a vision, but essentially, it is your responsibility as a school leader, and it's your responsibility to think about, where do you want the school to be in 5 years? What do you want the school to be doing? What do you want your teachers to be teaching in 5 years? What abilities do you want your students to have? And write down what those things are. Prioritize them. Put the most important one at the top of the list, and the next most important after that, and so on and so on. Your job will be then to take this vision and present it to the teacher, because they're going to help you implement the vision of where you want that school to be. Now, Deb Ed will tell you what the mission of the school is, but the vision is different than the mission. A mission tells us who we are as an organization, what's important to us as an organization. But vision specifically says, where are we going? What type of abilities are we going to instill in the students in our school that will be different than the school down the road, in the next province, or down in Manila? You see, that will be your responsibility as a leader. If you do not present a vision to your teachers, and you do not have a vision for your school, then you are just groping along. And sadly, things will not change at your school. Now, I know change is constant. It's always happening. The problem will be, is you will not be prepared to meet those changes when they come, because you will not have a vision for how to get there and where you're going.
So let's summarize what I've been talking about with you for the past hour or so. The 21st century is providing us with a new set of opportunities, but with these opportunities comes a requirement that we're going to have to develop some new competencies or skills in order to take advantage of the opportunities. The skills and abilities, examples being communication, problem solving, and networking, are competencies that we talked about and are also the areas of flexibility and vision must be a part of those skills and competencies. We can moan all we want about the changes that are coming, but we've got to deal with it. We've got a job to do, so we must stay calm and adjust to the new demands of this century. I can tell you that schools are not doing that today. They are doing what they have done for many, many years and have not adjusted to the new reality. I can only imagine that there are some schools in the Philippines that will not do it either, and sadly, there are students here in the United States as well as in the Philippines that will suffer as a result because leaders and teachers are not preparing them to take full advantage of the opportunities and challenges presented in this century. What's the reason that schools are not preparing students with the skills and abilities that they need for their future? Well, some of it we can attribute to the leaders and the teachers. They just are, not wanting to change. They're doing things the way they have always done it, and they want to continue that. Many of us realize that change is a constant. So, not accepting change is not an excuse, is not a reason. We're in the change business in education. We're changing lives. And so we need to be the first amongst those who are adjusting to new realities. Another reason can be attributed to the fact that many leaders and teachers, for that matter, are simply just not prepared with these new skills in mind. Keep in mind that many of the jobs that we have currently were not even thought about 20 years ago. They've been developed within the last 5, maybe 10 years. Think about all the apps on your cell phone and the people who developed them. They weren't doing that 20 years ago because cell phones didn't have applications with them. They weren't smart phones. So, because the leaders and the teachers were prepared differently, their focus is on the content, not necessarily on the skills that are necessary for success in this century. What this means is that we've got to change how we prepare the teachers and the leaders who are going to be in our schools. Also, curricula is not focused on the new reality of the 21st century. It mainly rests on the idea of the acquisition of knowledge. In other words, the point of curriculum is to convey knowledge to students. They remember it, put it down on a test, and then go on. Instead, we need to be teaching people how to find information, how to evaluate information for its truthfulness and accuracy, and then how to use that information in creative and unique ways. So I ask you this. When it comes to knowledge, why memorize factual information? Especially when you can Google that information and find it probably way quicker than you can if you try to remember it. Let's face it, anything you want to learn can be found on the internet for the most part and accessed through Google or YouTube or a host of other programs. I've mentioned something before that when I see something on TV that I don't understand, I whip out my iPad and I'm Googling it to find out what the people are talking about. If I have a question about something or how to do something, I go straight to the internet and find the answer there. It always amazes me what you can find on the internet. Lastly, it's the reality that if we don't change the course our school or our organization is going, we're going to end up exactly where we're heading, and that place is nowhere. We're going to be left behind, and I don't think that's fair to the children of the Philippines, and I really don't think it's fair to the children of the United States. We are the ones, the leaders, who will have to give an account for how we prepare these students for their future. In order for that to happen, we're going to have to change our competencies, in some cases, improve the skills and abilities in others. No one's going to do it for us. It's going to be up to us to take the first steps. And you're doing that right now by attending this conference, and I appreciate you doing that so much. I also appreciate your participation in your own professional development. You realize that it's not just you learn something and that's it. You continue your professional learning, and that's important for somebody who is going to be preparing the next generation of leaders. Now, as far as this conference is concerned, I know the organizers, and I've known them for several years, and they're among my dear friends. I'm proud of what they've accomplished, and I believe that what you've experienced this weekend, or will experience this weekend, will make a difference in your professional career, whether you're a leader or a teacher. So I leave you with this thought. I wish for you the best in this new academic year, that you have a very successful year, and that you make great strides in increasing the capacity of your organization. I hope that your dreams come true, and that you find success in your classroom or your school. As always, you have my highest regards. Should you want to contact me, whether it's for future events or you have questions about the session today, my contact information is on the very last slide. You can reach me at davisr, that's DAVISR, @troy.edu, and I would love to hear from you. Take care.